Yes. It's, actually, it's a little bit too early. I hit launch. I don't know what the hell made me hit launch. Maybe there's something inside of me saying, Frank, you actually need a little bit more time. And with your guests arriving at 7:15 tonight, I don't think you have enough time to get everything out on the table. Either way, it's 6:53. I launched a little bit earlier than I usually do. So I hope that you are enjoying a little bit of overtime in the pre-show. It's September 5th, 2024. We are October, November. It's November 5th is election day. Whoa. What are we going to do, man? Well, I'll tell you one thing we're going to do. We're going to get this show underway. It's going to be a nice little resting spot for the week, and tomorrow's going to be even better as far as it's Friday, and I've got not only Matt coming in, but Adel, 412 Anon, is passing through New York on his way to New Jersey, and he's going to stop in over here. So that's going to be great. Can't wait to hang out with him. Might even pack a couple of hookahs. So, he is of Middle Eastern descent. So I want to make him feel welcome to show him how much I've assimilated with him. Anyway, tonight we've got Jay Dyer and Timothy Gordon coming on. And the main question for tonight is why Christianity? I was asked a very fundamental question, and that was it. Well, it was actually why religion? And more specifically, why Christianity? It was posed to me by a member of the audience who had a hard time answering it themselves. So I said, all right, there's Thursday evening. And I planned this a couple of weeks ago, and the night is here finally. And boy, oh boy, are we going to have a good time. It's just one of those things where I'm astonished at how the time just flows like a river. All right. Now, a couple of things up front. I already told you about tomorrow night. I just want to thank my sponsors tonight. My sponsors are BlueMonsterPrep.com. Go and check them out. I heard a few of you already have. Now, listen, there is a lot of stuff coming up. We've got an election day that's 2 months away. There's also the regular old stress of the wintertime. I would look into things like power generation, especially solar power generation. There's a lot of great stuff over there, aside from food and water and first aid and communication. Just do your pre-winter, pre-election catastrophe service check in the house, in the basement, in the fallback location, whatever it is. And if you have any questions about how you should strategically use these resources you've set aside for things just like this, get in touch with Pat and Gina at BlueMonsterPrep.com. They have the promo code that's active. It's Frankly. Then have at it. Okay. So as of right now, a little bit of an update on the book club. Let's see where we are with that. Over on Twitter, there's just a few hours left in this. There's 17 hours left in this. We have 105 votes over there. We had hundreds of votes last night over on YouTube where we're mirroring this. And right now, which short story would you like to see become the subject of a public book club session this October? Right now, The Mask of the Red Death. Mask of the Red Death, Edgar Allan Poe, is leading 35.2%. Most Dangerous Game at 29.5%. The Monkey's Paw at 24.8%. The Swimmer at 10.5%. It's probably going to be Mask of the Red Death. Probably going to be. Now, the real cool thing I can think about here is some of these should just be me and you. But I would love to bring back a couple of guest co-hosts just to do these little one-offs. Monkey's Paw, that's going to be great. But Mask of the Red Death, I think that's how YouTube was trending last night too. So be on the lookout. You still have time to go, and I'm going to repost this right now on Twitter, so it's at the top of it. If you want to go to @QuiteFranklyTV and give it another look. If you haven't voted yet, that would be great. But Mask of the Red Death, it's edging everybody out. All right. Okay. Here's the first one up. We have a little bit to do before we go to our guests. So the first one I have over here is from Robert Barnes. Robert Barnes tweets the following. He says, anyone who buys Russiagate 2.0, the Tenet Media, is a sad, pitiful sucker. Real Likely Story is not a Russian government op at all, but closer to a Langley-sourced disinformation op to drop during the election to aid Democrats and fuel Russian paranoia and intimidate independent content creators. No doubt about it. I am most interested to see where this money came from, what the story becomes in the coming days. And, we can do more on this in the second half if we have enough time after the guests are gone. But if that doesn't work out, we have more than enough time to dive into this when Adel's in studio tomorrow with Matt, because I have a lot of thoughts I've been collecting since the broadcast I did with Matt Christensen last night, which it's pretty interesting. Because, again, we cover this stuff, but this hit very close to home. And even though there are 6 individuals that are being targeted here with the whole Tenet Media thing, it is about sending a major, major message to independent media and also messaging to the rest of the media consuming world that if you're getting your information from independent sources, especially right-wing independent sources, they're all carrying water for the Russians. The fact that they have rebranded the Cold War is so pathetic. Take a listen to this real quick. Here you go. This is from MSN. Now, Vladimir Putin said that he would actually like Kamala Harris because, he cited her infectious laugh, but also said just because she comes from a political background that's very, very, very predictable. Now, when he goes out and says that, the mainstream media had to go rush to say, oh, he's teasing. He's teasing. He doesn't actually want Kamala Harris because they just spent the entire day yesterday equating anybody's support of Donald Trump and anybody's effort to help get Donald Trump elected to trying to appease Putin because that's who some foreign president somewhere would like to see. I'm sure everybody in the world would have an opinion on who they would like to see and not like to see become the president over here in the United States because the United States looms so large in everybody's lives. I'm sure everybody has an opinion. But of course, whoever Putin likes or dislikes, that's going to be a problem for somebody. It's just ridiculous. And look at this part. Where do I have it? Let's see here. Russia wants Kamala Harris to win the the United States presidential election. Let me get it up on screen. There it is. Vladimir Putin said on Thursday in a teasing comment that cited her infectious laugh as a reason to prefer her over Donald Trump. Putin made the ironic remark a day after the U.S. Justice Department charged 2 Russian media executives over an alleged illegal scheme to influence the November election with pro-Russian propaganda. $10 million that got stuffed into a YouTube account on which everybody who signed on as a personality had much bigger audiences on their own. It's so ridiculous. The entire thing is so ridiculous. And then you have this on Mother Jones. Here's what it really comes down to. Take a look at this. It's an incredible frame job. While Tenet is only referred to in the indictment as U.S. Company 1, details made it readily identifiable. The indictment alleges that Tenet's coverage contained commentary on events and issues in the United States, such as immigration, inflation, and other topics, consistent with the government of Russia's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions. So every night that you and I get together to talk about what a blight and a danger, an existential threat, unchecked illegal immigration invasion that our federal government is actually sponsoring right now, the replacement theory that they actually tout and gloat over until you mention it, and then they call you a racist because they're fucking psychos. All of that stuff. Inflation. You don't like inflation? If you don't say that inflation is the lowest it's ever been and lie to yourself and everybody around you, and other topics consistent with the government of Russia's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions, you've been carrying water for the Russian government. And wherever you learned all that stuff from was probably duped as well. They duped Tim Pool and Matt Christensen. You were duped as well by Russians, because who the hell could ever look around them and see anything but prosperity and stability? I don't need the Russians to tell me that my hometown has been completely destroyed by illegal immigration and all the areas around here, what's going on 30 miles away in Manhattan. Don't got to talk about inflation and what's that done to cost of living all across the board. That's all from Russia. Don't you understand? So this is the DOJ in a meticulously planned and timed September rollout, just to let everybody know that if you're concerned with these issues, you aren't actually educated and you don't know what's going on in your personal life. You have been duped by Russian disinformation. And of course, it doubles, it moonlights, actually spearheads into another attack on independent media, just like they did in October of 2020. So God knows. And on the and then here's on the flip side. Here's the flip side of that. Here is Chuck Schumer, who says the only way we're going to have a great future in America is by granting citizenship to millions of legal aliens. Listen to this.
The only way we're going to have a great future in America is if we welcome and embrace immigrants, the dreamers, and all of them, because our ultimate goal is to help the dreamers, but get a path to citizenship for all 11 million or however many undocumented there are.
Yeah, I think this is actually, I remember this clip. Still, these are the kinds of things that they say. I don't think this was today, but it doesn't matter. This is, they have the nerve to call $10 million that was stuffed into some YouTube channel election interference. Meanwhile, here is Chuck Barbara Lerner Schumer saying that the only way to save the United States is to destroy the United States. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But when you have that kind of power and influence, when you got things locked down, you can do the unbelievable. And you can just repeat it and you can enforce it because you've got all the guns. All right, let's start this one off, shall we? We will be right back. I want to get the table set for our two guests, Jay Dyer and Timothy Gordon. We've got deep things to discuss tonight, and hopefully we have time in the second half for your calls, because then we can open it up to literally anything. Be right back.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back.
Does anybody else want to stay?
Let's ride!
Timing, the accusations, the Russia thing. Oh my God. Like I said, I have so many thoughts on this. I've been collecting them, and I have some other articles that we can talk about because it's a big story. It really is. I mean, it's not a substantive story, but it's another, it's another palette eraser. That's it. They get into sticky situation. They're seeing blips in the polling. They're having one embarrassment after another. And then they roll something like this out. It's like little life rafts, little chaotic life rafts. All right, anyway. So here's what I have for you tonight. I was asked recently, why religion, Frank? Why are you religious? And more specifically, why Christianity? That there are so many religions out there, all claiming to be valid for different reasons, and that ultimately, many of those many of those situations, those religions, come down to convert or die. Those convert or die situations, they end up becoming the resounding theme throughout history. Well, first, I would like to say that tonight's episode will be Christianity-centric because that's my greatest point of interest. And so, if you would like to call in afterwards and vouch for any other world religion or whatever the hell it is, you can, you're encouraged. Also, you can email me if you're listening to this after the fact. But before we get to our guests, and we talk about why I am religious, or at least more religious than I have been, I really try to keep most of that home because I don't want to seem sanctimonious. I'm not a very pious person, of course, but there's a lot of things that brought me to where I am right now. And we've talked about it in dribs and drabs. I'm sure some of you have heard it before. Number one, I see a physical world that has been constructed with seemingly mathematical precision. It's just, it's incredible what we learn about the minutia, the building blocks of everything. Professionally, I have had the opportunity to talk with many people who have strikingly similar experiences and journeys to non-physical places separate from their bodies, OBEs, NDEs, stuff like that. And though many of those people differ in their conclusions as to what the nature of these places are, it still lends itself to the fact that there is a world beyond this one. Now, on a philosophical level, there's the show that we did with Timothy Gordon a couple of years ago when we talked about Thomas Aquinas and the five proofs of God's existence. That was one of those watershed moments for me because that's when I started seeing philosophy and logic come in to make something that is usually ethereal and something you can't see and touch that you really need to have a leap of faith with, and it almost makes it a certitude, So that was that's a big one, and still back to that physical level, there are miracles you read about, even some relics. We talked about religious relics recently that have at least bolstered my faith. But though I am going to church again, I only know enough to know that I have more questions. The difference being that I'm not asking these questions from an agnostic point of view anymore because that's where I came from. And I believe that all that entire sensory experience combined, or multi-sensory experience combined, forms what is essentially the foundation of my spiritual life. As far as religion goes specifically, to that initial question brought about, why aren't you Buddhist, Frank, or Hindu? Why Christianity? Is it because of where I was born, my family history? I'd have to imagine that's part of it. I mean, being born in New York to an American family of Italian heritage, you're probably going to be baptized in the Catholic faith. You're probably going to be going to a Catholic school or something like that. It's or at least CCD if you're going to public school. That definitely contributed to how I started out. But there are plenty of years between high school and actually before, in the middle of high school, probably between 8th grade and my 30s, that I could have become Buddhist. I could have. There was certainly nothing standing in my way. But more fundamentally, it was through learning about hidden power structures in our world that not only did I start to identify evil for evil's sake, but I actually started to see how clearly ritualistic it was as well. It wasn't just psychopathic people with no morals and no inner voice and nothing, no conscience, and they just have some kind of a fetish for killing people and manipulating people. There's something ritualistic about it as well. It's one thing to learn about mentally ill people that get together when the moon is full, gather together in Untermeyer Park in Yonkers, New York, to sacrifice small animals. It's another thing altogether to learn about the occult history of the United States rocket program. It just goes to different levels. So it became clear to me that there are high stakes efforts to play to bring the culture in our world governments into alignment with something that is very, very anti-human. And there's also a concerted effort to rip people away from the counter to that evil. And I have never really heard of any Anyone covering the Freemasonic infiltration of the Buddhist churches, I never heard of it. So my first inclination was to look back into why Christianity was so threatening to the elite. You know, whether they be atheists or just straight up Luciferian. Why was Christianity, first and foremost, so incredibly threatening? And ultimately, I'm still making my way back to the church. But for the first time in my life, I'm asking the questions I never thought to ask when I was a child. So with that, I'm bringing some friends back. With that, I'm bringing some friends onto the show. Two friends that haven't been here for a while together who deal with these questions I have as part of their own profession. That's Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis, and soon, I don't know where Timothy is right now, but Timothy Gordon, Rules for Retrograde, should be on with us in just a couple of seconds. Jay, you there?
I am. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Oh, wait, hold on. Here comes Timothy. And we got Jay Dyer's here, and so is Timothy. You hear me, man?
Yo, what's up, guys?
Wonderful. It's great to have you both on again. It's been a minute, but it's awesome to see both of you at the same time.
Word.
Okay. So I'm just going to get right into it because I'm in the learning mood. I want to throw you guys a whole bunch of stuff, and let's just start with the bigger question. 10,000 world religions. You're making a claim that Christianity is the right one, and that's where it's at. How do you guys, and Tim, we'll just start with you. How do you whittle that down to one? I want to hear Tim first, then go at it, and then we can just all talk, and then I have more on that. So 10,000 down to one, Tim, how do you start?
Yeah, well, every major discussion or debate I've had publicly with an atheist begins this way. They think it's a strong foot to set out on, and I say, I agree, it's a strong foot for a Christian to set out on. The truth claims held by atheists about religionists they involve more than the average atheist or agnostic knows. So I just say you have to either believe in zero God, one God, or multi-God. And usually an atheist will assume, 10,000 world religions or something. I say, you're right. There's, for every serious Christian, or even Jew or Muslim, but we'll leave that to the side, there is some basic properties. Edith Hamilton talks about this with regard to the Greek gods that co-attend anything that's truly a deity. It has to be all-powerful, all-spatial, all-knowing. There are several other omnis, omnipotent, omniscient, omnispatial. Right off the bat, take 9,997 of those world faiths, all but three is the point, and say they don't qualify. All the world's polytheisms, Islam, Hinduism, not Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, whatever. And they don't qualify. They're worldviews, but they're not true religions insofar as they run into the Greek gods problem. You can't have a god that's all powerful like Zeus if his wife Hera is gumming up the works, the Greek gods problem. So not truly a god. So we're automatically down to three, and they are all of the three religions that at least reputedly began with Abraham, Father Abraham. So that's at least a good starter. I'm glad you led there.
Okay. So, Jay, let's take it to you. What would you add or subtract to that?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Tim said. The only thing I would say is that when I'm debating an atheist, I tend to always prefer the transcendental argument because even though it's kind of complex, it takes a little bit of fleshing out to really hammer it home. Ultimately, if you follow through with it, it kind of demonstrates that Trinitarian Christian theology is the only way to have a consistent, coherent, grounded metaphysic, epistemology, and ethic. And so those three elements that make up a worldview, everybody has a worldview, whether they know it or not. Even if they don't know about philosophy or care about it, they all have some basic set of commitments in those three domains, which makes up a worldview. That's a philosophy in my view, my perspective. Whatever beliefs you have about those three things, those three domains, they're going to necessitate one another. So if I believe something, say, about ethics, let's say I think that there's objective truth, there's objective morals that you have to submit to, that also assumes that I have knowledge of those ethical principles or those morals. So, and by extension, metaphysical claims as well. That just has to do with what exists, what's real, what's not real. So everybody has some kind of worldview. But when we start asking the questions about those starting points of a worldview, those beginning commitments, ultimately only, I believe, the Christian theistic position, specifically the Christian theistic position, can give an account for. And what I mean by that is epistemic justification, or a consistent, coherent, grounded account for the possibility of knowledge, the possibility of metaphysics, and the possibility of ethics in some coherent scheme. Really, Christianity checks all those boxes. And like Tim said, with the other positions, the other worldviews that are out there, even though they might have some overlap, at some point they're going to have a fundamental contradiction that can be demonstrated that makes those systems not coherent, not cohesive, and not a grounding for knowledge. So I'm not saying that the people in those positions don't have knowledge claims or belief claims. I'm saying that they don't have a consistent account of that knowledge.
Okay. Now, so let's just stick with you, Jay, because I want to ask you, this is something I've seen you touch on quite a bit in your debates. And then, Tim, of course, I want to hear your input. But you mentioned, you brought up the Trinity, and I was thinking about a question about the Trinity, because I've seen quite a few people, including, I think, one or two Muslims with you, that claim that the Trinity is a form of polytheism in itself. And I know in John's gospel is where Jesus makes a few definitive statements about the singularity between he and the Father. They're one and the same. But prior to that, I know why some of Jesus's references to God the Father being in third person is confusing to people. And then we have the whole concept of the Holy Ghost, and deeper reasoning and logic for this was never taught very well to me when I was in school. I know this because I'm getting closer to the day that I have to be able to explain it to my daughter. And I'm not the type to accept well, that's just the way it is as an answer. So start with you, because I know that you've done a lot on this. Talk about the Trinity and how it actually makes sense.
Yeah, two things to say to that. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. First thing to say is that the word monotheism, although I don't necessarily have a problem with it, depending upon what a person means, this is actually a really late term. The actual phrase mono, this is actually not used until the 1600s. If we go back to the teachings of the church fathers, who I believe accurately reflect what the scriptures teach, they use the term the one God, referring to the person of the Father. And the reason I stress that is not to be obtuse, but that in a lot of debates now with Muslims, and in fact, the last month or two, we've had a lot of Jews come to debate, and the arguments end up being the same, is that we always end up trying to stress and explain that Christianity is not this new thing. I mean, there's elements of it that are new, but you'll notice as you read through the Gospels, it's not just the Gospel of John, but Jesus is always really interested in demonstrating that everything he's teaching is consistent with the Torah. And not just the Torah, obviously, but also the prophets, the writings, the historical books. So what we have here is actually an Old Testament Trinitarianism that is absolutely essential to argue, especially when it comes to Muslims, because their whole case is that Jesus, Paul, later people, church fathers, Constantine, and they invented Trinity. No, they didn't invent the Trinity. And that's why it's so crucial. If you go watch my debate with Daniel Hakikachu, my opening statement is called the Jewish Trinity, because it's absolutely essential to show that there's no disparity whatsoever between what Jesus teaches about his relationship to the Father and to the Spirit, and what is in literally dozens of texts in the Torah and the prophets, the Psalms, etc. I could go through many of them if you want. Just for example, when we look at the book of Genesis, we see Abraham eating and meeting face to face with the Lord. And if you read John chapters 5-9, Jesus makes it very clear over and over to the Pharisees that he's the one eating with Abraham. He's the one on the mountain with Moses in Exodus, meeting face to face. So many other passages, Exodus 31, Exodus 33, explicitly refer to the person and the deity of the Holy Spirit. That's not the only example. It's just one of many. The Psalms refers to the person of the Father over and over. The angel messenger, the Son, the messenger of the covenant, as he's called in many passages, and to the personal Holy Spirit. So when Jesus talks about the person of the Spirit in John 14-17, he's not inventing a new thing. It's all throughout the Old Testament when we're really fluent in those passages and those texts. So to go back to your point there about the notion of monotheism, we believe that everything Jesus is teaching is absolutely perfectly consistent with monotheism, because the word God, this is really important, especially when you're debating with Muslims or people like that. Muslims assume that the word God only has one referent, that it only picks out divinity proper or the divine essence. For us, even in scriptures, the word God can have many references. It can pick out the person of the Father. It can pick out the divine essence. It can pick out divine attributes or actions, what we call in the East energies. It can pick out even non-divine things that are created, like angels and humans. I have said ye are gods. So God is not a strict single referent term. And this is very important because, again, for us, you can have monotheism, believing that the God the Father is God by identity, but that he generates a son to whom he communicates that singular divine essence. And so it's not polytheism, because there's only one God proper, God the Father, one divine nature, and also a very important doctrine called perichoresis, which is that the divine persons indwell one another. So these are three ways that we know that there's not three gods, there's not many gods, there's only one God, but that one God is tri-hypostatic or tri-personal because he's revealed that way.
That's I'm gonna have to listen to that one a couple of times. That's incredible. That's a good way of Tim. What do you say about that? I'd love to hear this. Tim, you there? Did we lose Tim?
I got kicked off for a second. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, everything I heard Jay say, I absolutely believe is similar between our traditions, or identical. I don't think there's anything that's even distinguishable. Jay's Orthodox, I'm Catholic, of course. I would just say on a more basic level, the atheist will say to the Christian, three persons, one substance. What does this really mean? The word is homoousios. This means same substance, one substance, even though there are three persons in the Trinity. There's nothing contrary to reason. By this, we mean the principle of the excluded middle, the principle of non-contradiction, that is violated or run foul of by the concept of homoousios, meaning one single substance, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So there's no contradiction there. All that the atheist or the agnostic tends to run foul of is a failure of imagination, because we can't conceive of another corporeal embodied person, a human being, or like an angel, a non-corporeal person that is homoousios with three persons. But all we say in the Thomistic terminology is that these persons are conceptually separable, and more than that, but except that doesn't mean that they have to be ontologically divisible one from another. So there are lots of examples that have been famously given in this regard. Separability, ontological separability.
Hold on, Tim. I think we lost you again. Tim?
He might do better if he just went to audio, because if you got a hotel Wi-Fi, the video might be a little much for the pipes.
Could be. Tim, you hear us? Maybe just hold on. When we get him back, I'll tell him to drop the video. All right. Well, let's see. He'll come back in here. This is the next question I have, because
could I real quick make one point about
please,
the analogies that Tim's talking about?
Yes.
Before you move on, real quick. A lot of times, atheists, agnostics, that's what I was addressing the Muslim objection of monotheism, but like Tim's saying, even in the created order, and I'm not equating God to the created order, but even amongst created things, we can find things that have multiplicity and unity in them. And there's nothing inherently contradictory about that. And even in mathematics, we can see situations where something can be both 3 and 1, even perhaps in an equal sense, without it being irrational or incoherent. I mean, just real quickly, 1 to the third power, 1 times 1 times 1. And even just the numeral 3, I mean, is this one thing or is this 3 things? Well, it's both at the same time. So there's nothing irrational about the triad or the Trinity.
Okay, that makes the visual actually help, to be honest. So then the next question, and the reason why I asked about the Trinity is because we just came off of that first question about, whittling down 10,000 world religions to one, and to be able to do away with polytheist religions. Where does the Trinity fall within the idea of polytheism? Because that's something that I would say the average churchgoer would probably have a little bit of a hard time actually putting into articulate terms there. But the question I have now is, and I don't know if Tim, are you there yet? Okay, maybe he should also get inside too. But here's the next thing I would like to revisit. I actually want to do this with you, Jay, in Christmas, but it's really germane to our discussion tonight. And that is when we're talking about asking the question, why Christianity, and more specifically then, why Jesus? Christmas, for example, the critics of the faith would say, well, Christianity is merely a repository for recycled myths of much older traditions, where there are 12 disciples and virgin births and, December 25th birthdays, and there's resurrections and deaths and sacrifice and all that stuff. Now, I don't know anybody can publish anything, and I think that anybody can interpret things wrong, either out of malice or ignorance. But when you are faced with this question, how do you confidently establish Christianity's uniqueness?
Me or Tim? Is Tim back?
Tim, are you there? Tim? I don't know. Oh, it says 3 participants, but I don't know if they'll... I don't know. Tim, you hear us? Okay, anyway. Go ahead. Did you get that question?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different... Well, there's 2 things about that objection, I would say. First is, just because there's similarities amongst religions, it doesn't follow from that necessarily that this one or that one borrowed, even if it's later in time. We don't necessarily know, because a lot of ancient and even medieval history, there's a lot that we don't know. And so we don't know where this or that source might have gotten these ideas from. In fact, if you go back to the early church writings, they're even debating amongst the church fathers whether or not Plato was in fact influenced by maybe reading Moses or Isaiah. So we just oftentimes, especially amongst academics and people who are not believers, they just assume that anything that happens in the Christian sphere or in the writings of the prophets or whatever, it had to be ripped off from pagan sources. Well, we don't know that, right? It could be the other way around. And in fact, perhaps Moses influenced Egyptian philosophy and theology. Perhaps when Jacob was in Egypt, he influenced the Egyptians. It's just people just have a lot of assumptions that they'd never actually questioned. But beyond that, it's not just a matter of, say, picking out one similarity, which would, again, also be a fallacy, to say that, well, because there's this similarity of a virgin birth here, and this other religion has a virgin birth, therefore they're the same religion, or therefore they have the common origins. We just don't know it. And it doesn't follow logically from similarity to there being common origin. And I would say, if you look at the messianic prophecies as a whole, of which there are many, there's not just 1 or 2, there's many, many, many messianic prophecies. That's a good way to see that, what the Old Testament, the prophets teach about the coming of the Messiah. They're very specific. They're very precise. There aren't 1 or 2, probably everybody's, Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22. There's way more messianic prophecies with much more precision that demonstrate inspiration beyond just, well, do you see in other words, if you look at it holistically, it's a lot more to Christ being the Messiah and the messianic prophecies as a proof of inspiration than just something like, well, how would I know between this deity claiming, a virgin goddess versus that one over there? Well, Jesus is not just a virgin born person.
Oh,
he's also the fulfillment of tons and tons of very specific prophecies. Like Daniel 9, for example, it says that when the Messiah comes, the temple will be destroyed. You'll have an end to the sacrificial system of the Jews. You'll have the gospel being opened up to the Gentiles. something that in Daniel's day would have seemed outlandish, outrageous, right? Because the time of Daniel, they were going into Babylonian captivity. They didn't have a temple. So how's there gonna be a Messiah who comes to end the temple worship? If we think about it in terms of Isaiah's day or Daniel's day, all these prophecies, they are just sort of like outlandish, and yet they came to pass.
Tim, are you with us? I just heard him pop in. Tim, you there? I told him to go straight audio. Yeah, that's okay. So that's an interesting way of getting around to that too, because I'll tell you, sometime around late November, December, it's going to be the same old thing. There's going to be however many people influencing the algorithm online, sharing those same Stephen Fry videos, talking about Mithras and all of the side by side to take away any kind of uniqueness to the Christmas season and whatnot. And I always wonder. I always look for any kind of a rebuttal to that. And I
can speak specifically to that. In the Bollingen series of the Joseph Campbell set, which is ironic because you would think, well, the Joseph Campbell Bollingen series, they're going to have, this is a famous comparative religion series. You would think, well, they're going to assume the, common origin roots of Jesus and the Mithras. There's actually a really good essay in the one, I'll have to find the actual exact reference, but there's a really good essay contrasting the Mithras with Christianity. And so what happens is that there's a superficial similarity between certain rituals or rites, and people then assume, again, because of superficial similarity, common origin or common teaching or common theology. There's way more that distinguishes the teaching of Christianity, again, out of the Hebrew prophets from the teaching of the Mithras that, again, has nothing to do with like what Mithraism is. And the article, the reason I'm pointing to that article is that even in a comparative religion, Carl Jungian, Joseph Campbell, syncretist type of publication, they're putting out articles saying this idea that Christianity borrowed from Mithraism is like an old, higher critical thing, and it's been discarded. So even academics don't believe this anymore.
Okay. And Tim, did you get any of that? I saw you bounced in the middle of that comment.
Yeah, it's a great comment. I mean, they have to make up their mind. Even like Gandhi famously said that, Christianity is so unique that if he'd ever met a Christian that actually followed the teachings of Jesus, he'd become one. So agnostics and atheists are typically on both sides of the question, always saying on the one hand, if it gets close to Christmas, that it's an utterly derivative religion, what Jay was responding to. And on the other hand, they acknowledge famously how Christian asceticism, martyrdom, monasticism, particularly the Christian sexual ethic, is sui generis in the world. It's utterly its own. So sure, there are accidental likenesses. Jay did a great job knocking a lot of those down. But a virgin birth, that this is common to a lot of the world religions. That doesn't mean it's fake. I mean, every other man in the world tends to wear pants to work. That doesn't mean that all the men have the same personality as I do. So those are very, very superficial, accidental similitudes with Christianity. And yet the same atheist or agnostic, or, I don't know, guy writing a sitcom for NBC will make jokes about how unique the impositions, the moral impositions of Christianity are, particularly the sexual ones. Richard Dawkins will say, God's not petty enough. He'll use that term, petty, to care about the moral impositions on the sex life, the loin issues of Christianity. And Christianity is so weird because it stands alone there. Well, again, martyrdom is unique to Christianity. It's utterly different from the kind of thing that Muslims call martyrdom. Monasticism is utterly unique to Christianity out of the great Desert Fathers tradition. And when it comes to the ideas that Jesus is actually teaching in, his famous teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, it's an utterly, utterly unique world religion.
You're talking about martyrdom there, and the first thing I went to from that point is a question that you and I discussed, a topic you and I discussed just last week that I would actually like to throw over to Jay right now, because I jumped from martyrdom to miracles and even relics. Now, Jay, in the very, very brief exchange you and I had off air, I asked you about relics, and you said you did acknowledge relics and whatnot, but it's very, very important not to have that become the proof of a faith, or the proof of Christianity in particular. Can you expand? Because that was a very, very short exchange we had. Can you expand on where miracles and relics do live inside of a healthy balance with the question of faith? Because I'll tell you, for people like me, learning about some of these events, learning about something like the Shroud of Turin or something like that, it does inspire a lot of intrigue that has brought people to the faith, that's for sure. But like you said before, it shouldn't be the proof of the faith. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, what I meant to say was that maybe in a limited sense, we could say relics are, quote, proofs. I would say maybe confirmations. I think the New Testament uses the terminology of the signs that accompany Christ and his apostles are confirmations of the faith. The only reason I would say not strict proof is that Jesus warns even in the Gospels that those who seek signs and wonders are an adulterous, wicked generation. So in other words, there's never going to be some kind of object that will be like the ultimate proof, because like all other objects, they're always going to be debated. They're part of an interpretive scheme that we have for reading the world. So for example, I can show 1 million relics to an atheist. An atheist is always going to interpret relics according to his worldview.
Absolutely.
So I think the proofs in the strict sense of the way we use that word usually tend to be more so things like what we were arguing earlier about apologetics or about the message. Does Jesus fulfill the messianic prophecies? Usually those are, I think, the stronger proofs. But in a limited sense, I think we could say that the existence of relics is in part an attestation to the historical reality of these people, their time, their events. And I don't mean to say they're just that. In the Orthodox view, we believe that they are charged with the divine energy. So we think that relics really do have a divine power in them, as do the icons and the holy images. So they're very important. I was just using proof in our discussion in a stricter, more logical sense. But also, by the way, the essay critiquing this whole claim of Mithraism and Christianity, it's in volume 2 of the Eranos yearbook, which is actually a really good book. But if you want that, let me see if I can get it right. Papers from the Eranos yearbook, edited by Joseph Campbell. There's a guy who wrote a critique, basically just refuting the whole idea that Christianity is Mithraism. Okay.
Wonderful. We got that on the screen for anybody. I'll probably go check it out myself, especially as in the lead up to the holidays. Tim, we just did a whole show on the Shroud last week and whatnot, but is there anything that Jay just said right there you want to comment on before we get to the next question?
Jay referred to it. Yeah, St. Paul says in inerrant scripture that those young of faith will seek signs and wonders. And I think that's consistent with experience. Lots of people that are transferring over to the faith will be rightly ordered toward the faith in a more compelling way by such signs and wonders. And there's nothing wrong with that. Once you've been there for a while, then you're going to, what we call the motives of credibility in Catholicism. These are going to be more compelling to you in a lasting way, and especially the person of Christ and his both the superficial and the very hidden, profound ways that he is the absolute fulfillment of the Old Testament. That is more compelling to people who are less young of faith, according to St. Paul in the Bible. But no, of course, I mean, I believe in Aristotelian hylomorphism. So it shouldn't surprise folks who are truly Christian. It always tends to surprise Protestant Christians that there is something like a Legend of Zelda magical objects. There aren't many of them, but why wouldn't there be? If Jesus was flesh and blood in his 33 years on Earth, then things like the Shroud of Turin ought not to be that surprising to a believing Christian. And to the agnostics and atheists out there who find them unbelievable, well, science, who's the demigod, which has replaced Christianity or any other religions in their hearts, it cannot account for them. So that's perfectly healthy. It's perfectly salubrious. It just shouldn't be, like Jay said, it shouldn't be the entire account of faith that one renders on Judgment Day.
Okay, very valid stuff there. You had mentioned, but staying with you just for a second, what was that Gandhi quote that you had said before about the uniqueness of Christianity? If anybody actually held true to them, he'd be a Christian himself, was it?
Yeah, it's famous kind of paragraph. The last line of it's what often gets quoted, which is, if I ever met a good Christian, I would become one myself. But the paragraph which precedes it is him giving an account of the absolute uniqueness and excellence of Jesus. Gandhi's just making the somewhat cynical point that few Christians can live up to the mark of the God-man, which I don't know why that surprises him much.
Well, see, and this is something where another one I can't wait to hear both of you comment on. The audience member that wrote into me spent a good portion of the email actually expressing a good amount of anger, not in a wild, irrational way. It was directed toward organized religion as a whole. But of course, knowing what side of the tracks I'm on right now, there's that pointedly toward Christianity as well. And they brought up the whole convert or die mentality at the heart of many conflicts throughout history. And in Christianity's case, people will use at least loose references to the Crusades, the Inquisition, the conquering of the Americas, or even modern sexual and satanic ritual abuse stories that we are always being uncovered now as a reason to challenge the authenticity of the faith itself. How do you handle that question, both of you guys? And Jay, we'll start with you because I'm sure you both get it a lot.
I think all institutions, even, we view the church as a theanthropic, meaning human and divine institution. So it has a human element, it has a divine element as well. All institutions, even one that's theanthropic, because of the human side, has the potentiality for state influence, non-state actors to send in people, try to subvert it, try to take it over, try to control it. For example, we see this in the history of church many times in the Icon Council in the 7th century. The locus of attack was largely the state trying to turn the church into an iconoclastic entity. You go back to the Arian crisis. Some of the emperors were also Arian or semi-Arian. They wanted to turn the church into an institution that, as we talked about earlier, didn't believe in the Trinity. This actually allowed the state to really control it, or that was their motivation, their move, their desire. So this is something that is susceptible. I think any institution is susceptible to that kind of influence, subversion, infiltration, control, or attempted control. But we wouldn't say that the entirety of the church. I think we would have different accounts between Tim and I here at this point. But for the Orthodox perspective, we wouldn't think that the entirety of the bishops in the world could be totally sold on some lie or totally co-opted, totally controlled. We would say there's always going to be, valid, ordained, truly believing Orthodox bishops, even if there was a bad situation where, like in the Arian crisis in the 4th century, even the majority of the empire, even the majority of the bishops at some points were Arian or semi-Arian. By that, I mean they didn't believe in the correct doctrine of the Trinity. So you can even be in the minority, but we still would confess that the gates of hell won't prevail against the church. You're always going to have, faithful bishops that preserve and hand on the truth and the true faith. So that's, I think, one side of this. And then beyond that, you and I have talked, I think, about, Gladio and different operations and the CIA and foreign governments, secret societies, Freemasonry. All of these entities have at various times desired to co-opt Christianity, infiltrate it, destroy it. NGOs, foundations, liberalize it. Rockefellers, others, they want to turn it into this, human institution, a social justice entity, American soft power. I mean, all of these are examples of attempts to co-opt Christianity and the church into basically engines of other entities, other power blocks for the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said before in the opening, and that's one of the things that brought me back to being interested in going to church and filling in all these gaps is that starting to recognize a lot of those operations and wondering why Christianity was such an existential threat to the plans that certain people have for the world. You know, and even during, just to play, play both sides of this out here too. Even during my own spiritual low points, I would have never expected war or violence to be absent in people just because they're religious. For example, there's no rival to the brutality of communist regimes of the 20th century alone. There's no rival to what they were doing to people by the hundreds of millions. And many times just because they were religious and godlessness was the status quo. Tim, what do you have on this?
Well, it came up very early. I think the 4th or 5th century. It was Gregory the Great, I believe, that ordered Christians who were as a kind of violent side errand in the 4th Crusade. Maybe my time's messed up. There were Christians that were forcing baptism upon Jews, and Gregory the Great said, "You only do this through sweetness of preaching, never through the force of the sword," which had already been Christian doctrine, has always been a Christian doctrine since. So you don't judge a religion by the most errant instances of the religionists. There's never ever been contradiction on this score. Christianity has always been a religion whereupon fides et ratio walk hand in hand, faith and reason go together, and this is why forcible conversion has always been condemned loudly, volubly by the popes. If one goes and reads the Regensburg address by Pope Benedict XVI, he provides an excellent example of the fact that forcible conversion, which atheists love pointing at, is a uniquely Muslim phenomenon in the 7th and 8th and 9th centuries. As soon as, for example, Muhammad came into power after the Hijra with his uncle Ali, as soon as they were popular, they started saying forcible conversion is a good thing. Whereas before the Hijra, the flight from Mecca to Medina, they taught strictly forcible conversion isn't a good thing. This has something to do with the historical happenstance of being initially in the minority and being in Medina in the majority. Christianity, on the other hand, has always spoken with one voice that this is bad. Christianity is a non-voluntarist, anti-nominalist religion. That means that God cannot violate the principle of contradiction, unlike what the Muslims believe. And stemming from this view, the idea that God will always act sun logos, with logos. Jesus is the logos man himself, will never order us to act violently or against reason. And that's why, for example, it doesn't matter what Christian tradition we're talking about, even Protestant, Orthodox, or Catholic, a baptism and a confirmation, two of the sacraments, are not valid if they were forced upon an adult. So this is simply an empty set of a critique of Christianity. Level it fine at Islam, but it's always been held in Christianity that forcible conversion is not even a bona fide conversion. And there's never been a religious war fought in the name of religious conversion. The Crusades were holy wars fought over relics and lands that had been taken largely in the Orthodox Christian part of the world forcibly by violent Islam. Remember, Muhammad was a warlord. He fought 79 battles in his life. 78 of them were offensive, according to Robert Spencer. And this checks out in other documents I've cross-referenced it with. So Christianity, as it implemented the Crusades, was not attempting to convert the non-believer, whether Jews or Muslims. This simply is a, sophomoric apprehension of what the Crusades were about. They were not about converting non-believers. They were about retaking what's rightfully ours.
That right there is something I've been actually reading a lot about myself. I'd love to have conversations like this about the Crusades with you guys. Well, either or of you. I would also like to talk about the Inquisition one day. There's a lot about that. I don't know too much about. I know that in this email that I received over the last couple of weeks that became the source material for tonight's show. This particular audience member was also pretty bitter about what he knew about 19th century and early 20th century Native American boarding schools, because of course he had some family that was one Native nation or another, that there was essentially forced conversions here in the United States during the 19th and early 20th century in Native American boarding schools. Now, I don't know if that is just, if that's certain denominations or whatever the hell else going on there, but do you know of any denouncements of stuff like that? Was it Catholic? Was it Orthodox? Was it Protestant? He brought that up specifically, so I wouldn't want to leave that out.
Well, this came up like 4 years ago. In Canada, there's a really funny relationship, a state relationship, similar to the German relationship with the church, where it's really an act of statism to force Catholic schools or Christian schools as a kind of public education. And that's what you have in certain parts of Canada and in Germany. There's a really odd mesalliance between the church and the state there, one that America's always been circumspect about. So the problems that folks were reacting to, that I think your emailer is reacting to from 4 years ago into Canada, that was a statism issue rather than a Catholic issue. Like I say, roundly and flatly, the church has always condemned forced conversions, and I guess you would have to deal with Catholicism and Islam separately from the prospect of Catholicism and Judaism. When we get into the Spanish Inquisition, once again, this is not any more forced conversion of the infidel, the Jew in this case, any more than it was forced conversion of the Muslim in the Crusades. In the Crusades, it was largely taking back what is rightfully Christianity's, helping Eastern Christianity take it back. And of course, there were divergent Christian parties that were acting badly in war. This is just a fact of life, collateral damage, etc. Mainly restricted to the Fourth Crusade, but the Pope was quick to chasten such errant Christians. But again, it was never about forcible conversion. With regard to the Spanish Inquisition, in a word, this was expulsions of how to say it. There were expulsions of Jews from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, and this is because subversives are expelled from countries, but that doesn't mean that they've been forcibly converted. And by the way, there are 108 other instances of forcible conversion of practitioners of Judaism for subversion. And I'll just say this:
wait, forcible conversion or expulsion? Expulsion, you mean?
Expulsion, forcible expulsion, not forcible conversion. And I would just close with the idea that if I'm eating out at 109 restaurants in a row and I keep getting kicked out of those restaurants for subversive behavior, lewd behavior, lascivious behavior, whatever it is, that's probably not 109 restaurants' fault. It's probably mine. That's a longer conversation.
Yeah, it is. It is a very long conversation. And I would like to actually talk about the Inquisition one day, because I haven't gotten into it. Jay, there was a lot to unpack there. Anything that's came up with you that you want to add to?
Yeah, for people that are interested in a longer treatment of the medieval period, I did a talk from a big fat scholarly book that I read some years back. He's an Anglican historian and scholar. He's actually really good on the Middle Ages. His name is Malcolm Lambert, and did a summary of his 600-page book. You can find that on my channel, where I go through his take on the Middle Ages, particularly the rise of what's called the Holy Office of the Inquisition. And a lot of people misunderstand this. There's also another secular historian. His name is Henry Common, and he wrote a book pointing out that all of the sort of crazy stories of like millions of women being burned in the Middle Ages from the it's all made up. It's all nonsense. The church's Inquisition at the max perhaps killed a few thousand people, according to Common, again, Henry Common, a secular scholar. The Spanish Inquisition, which was actually a state institution, did a lot more of that kind of stuff. But you have to keep in mind that heresy and these kinds of errors are not just sort of random happenstance or just sort of like, who cares what somebody thinks about the person of Christ. In the Middle Ages, when you have a society or civilization that is largely Christian, whether Eastern or Western, if you have groups that are promoting really wild, radical positions, they're not just intellectual errors. They can also upset the whole social order. The greatest example of this is the medieval sect of the GETTR, who were essentially Gnostics. And Malcolm Lambert in that book covers the GETTR extensively. They actually were fairly militant, which is odd because usually Gnostic groups aren't like militant, but the GETTR actually ended up getting like multiple castles and fortresses. And so they became like a real threat to the existing Christian structure. And again, there might be multiple reasons why, and even Lambert notes this, like maybe, yeah, there's a lot of corruption in the church. And when there's a lot of corruption, opulence, decadence in the church, that provides a sort of justification. I'm not saying it was right to become a Gnostic, but that's what impels the people to say, oh, well, I guess I'm going to go over to this sect over here because these people are so corrupt. So corruption ends up breeding a lot of this social revolution that heresy promotes. That's why kings had these laws and rules against heresy. It wasn't just, like every hippie DMT bro says, we want to control this dude. I mean, it's much more than that. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. But I'll also say that people don't know that the techniques of the Holy Office and canon law in the West, the way that they had juridical defense and procedure for the rights of the accused, a lot of the laws and the things that we have on the books in America, they actually come out of church law, canon law, East and West, and even the Holy Office of the Inquisition. So the people misunderstand this due to atheist propaganda, as if the church was burning millions of witches. First of all, there weren't millions of witches to burn in the Middle Ages. That's retarded, right? But
right.
Like it's not as extreme as they say, and it was all about good order in society in a majority Christian society, and it only makes sense for any society that's majority Christian to have Christian laws and Christian rules. As any majority Buddhist, Shinto, they're going to have laws that reflect their worldview, their beliefs. So, and as Tim said, I mean, the Crusades, if you study the Crusades, they're not primarily motivated by pure power and forced conversion. I've never even heard that it was about forced conversion. That's a bizarre atheist argument I've never heard.
It is.
It was defensive because you had, like Tim said, the rise of this new sect of Muhammad that was threatening already established Christian lands, and so it was much more of a defensive move. I think overall, the people in the East needed the help from the West. There were bad actors, as Tim said. I think some of the French kings and crusaders were just pillagers. They were adventurers out for loot, for booty. So there was a lot of that going on. The King of France ended up falling out eventually, even with the Pope, if I recall, the Council of Vienne, this kind of stuff. So it's more complex than good guy, bad guy. But one thing I would say, the only one place I disagree with Tim is this, that from the Orthodox perspective, we think there's a big shift in the 11th century as to the papacy sort of taking on a lot of new claims and powers, which becomes one of the factors as to why there's crusades. I concede, and I totally agree with Tim, that largely it's defensive, but there is also, we believe, this rise of new military monastic orders, which is unheard of. There is a rise, in our view, on the papacy in the 11th century, Gregorian reform, seeking a lot of new geopolitical power, and that's something that the Orthodox position would disagree with. Otherwise, everything Tim said was correct.
Okay. Tim, anything you got on that before I move on? I have one. I know you're limited. You're on vacation right now, but I have one more big question to ask both of you guys. But if you have anything to say with Jay's last comment, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, getting into the nature of the papacy is obviously one of the few really key issues dividing the East and the West. There's a long response that accommodates Jay's last remark, but yeah, we should do that soon, maybe on the show or something.
I will listen. Whatever the hell happens, I'd love to. If that's something you guys ever do together, because I know you've done streams on your own. Just hey, this is just like volume 1 of a couple of calls that we do. I still would like to have a Protestant on with us one time as well, but I'd love to hear you guys talk about stuff like that and just like weigh it out. But Jay, real quick, you mentioned Shintoism and Buddhism. That's popped up a little bit. Have you ever debated a Shintoist before?
No, I mean, I think typically Far Eastern religions don't debate. I mean, I'm not saying it's never possible, but they don't usually engage in sort of rational discourse based on truth or falsehood, because kind of underlying most Far Eastern religions is that logic and duality and all this stuff is something that you're supposed to transcend. So they don't really, I mean, it kind of, debate kind of assumes the laws of logic, kind of assumes objectivity, and a lot of Far Eastern religions are kind of not really based on that. So I think one time a Buddhist guy called in and we debated for maybe 20 minutes, but they're not really missionary proselytizing faiths, so they don't really do that.
Okay, well then here's a question I have for both of you guys, because again, I just wanted to test the waters in a number of different places, and I'll find other questions to ask next time. But this may actually go back and as an offshoot of the why not many gods question, but perhaps not. There's a power to be tapped into here on this earth, no doubt about it. We are certainly conduits of that power, I believe, and some people learn to hone it and understand it better than others. And in past episodes in which we were discussing topics like exorcism, I noted with some guests that demons have been cast out of people for thousands of years, even before Christ. Human will has galvanized in ritualistic ways for both good and bad purposes since before the birth of Christ as well. So, it's just think of some of his myth and legend, and others just like long-standing tradition. So I want to ask you guys. I guess we'll start with Jay. How does this relate to the question about that people usually have, or the statements they usually have about plurality? This idea that there's more than one way to skin a cat. Especially when it comes to exorcism and the spiritual world, or even just manifestation when it comes to human will and applying it there. A lot of that predates Christianity, and some would say that hey, there's some kind of an unseen mechanics to the universe over here that we can tap into, whether or not we are invoking the name of Christ. So what do you say to that? Is that all inherently evil because it was established prior to Christ's birth, or I don't know, just run away with that one a little bit.
I mean, no, and that wouldn't really negate Christianity, because remember what I claimed at the beginning. I was arguing that the religion of the Old Testament is actually Christianity. Even though the name's not there, you have a tri-hypostatic deity revealed in the Torah and in the prophets. We believe, as Jesus says, John 5-9, that Moses, Abraham, they knew they were worshiping the Son of God. They knew him face to face. So this wasn't a mysterious, different religion or anything like that. It was proto-Christianity. Christianity really just confirms and fulfills what was already there. So there's not a different religion back then. And the account that we would have of the other world religions out there, even back before the time of Christ, I mean, we think the New Testament actually discusses this, right? So, for example, a lot of the Eastern Church Fathers teach that when Christ died, he descended into Hades, the realm of the dead, and that the gospel was preached there to them. Peter says this, St. Cyril of Alexandria, many church fathers, John of Damascus, expound upon what it means for Christ to commit or to engage in what we call the harrowing of Hades, which is really to destroy the power of death in his descent into Hades, to preach the gospel to those who had died, who were righteous. We don't exactly know who was righteous and who wasn't. We know that Paul says in Romans 2 that the people who die without law will be judged without law. That doesn't mean they're necessarily automatically saved. We just don't know that. God doesn't tell us the destiny of those people. But we could definitely agree and say that, I mean, there are angels, we would say, that help govern the universe. There's angels that are all over the world and all over time. And so certainly you could have, even amongst pagans, angelic visitors helping or even exorcising spirits. That's possible. But none of that, even if we admitted that or conceded that, it wouldn't negate the position that we have as Christians that it's still the one true faith or one true religion. We believe that there are truths everywhere, but that specifically divine revelation comes through the Hebrew prophets, through the person of Christ, and it's found in the church. So we wouldn't say that even divine revelation can be restricted to the church, but you can have miracles, you can have these kinds of manifestations even outside of it, or even in the other religions. That doesn't make the religions true. It's that it's good in spite of the religion, because human nature is good, creation is good, the world is good. We believe in what's called the logos spermaticos. This is the teaching of the early church fathers, that the seeds of Christ are everywhere, even amongst pagans, because although their religion is false, it doesn't mean everything they believe or that their nature is bad or false, right? So creation is good. Evil is a privation or a defect. It's not an actual thing. And so this might sound a little weird to a Catholic, but in the Orthodox view, we think actually grace is natural to man. I'm not saying that grace is nature, but we believe that, as St. Maximus says, there's nothing more natural to man than to come to God and to, as Paul says, to the pagans, the word is near you, even in your heart. So it's natural to man to believe in God if he's following through with his Edenic nature. Now, not everybody does that because we are fallen, but no, there's still truths out there without the religions as a whole being true.
Okay. So Tim, take that away. You know, there's that. Go ahead.
Yeah, grace builds upon nature, and so it doesn't sound funny at all to hear that. Actually, it's one of the condemned. It's a condemned heresy in the Roman Catholic Church to say that God is not knowable through the reason alone. We can't know about God without articles of faith and without supernatural scripture and things like that. But grace builds upon nature, and like Jay said, you know, through man's Edenic nature, when we're acting in concomitance with our grace, which is not like an alien. It's alien insofar as it's a gift from God, but it builds upon our human nature because our human nature was good. Creation was good. I would say in regard to exorcism, this is a very interesting proposition, and this came up not long ago as an aside to my show. So, what Christians believe, and again, I think Protestants are the same as Catholics or Orthodox on this, is that all of the false religions, particularly the polytheistic religions, are worshiping false gods, and they're lowercase g gods, as I discussed in the opening point, and they're actually demons. So a lot of them have names that will be familiar to the reader of the Old Testament. I mean, like Baal and Beelzebub and things like that. Are names that are synonymous with Satan. Demons often give false names in Roman Catholic exorcisms for who they are. They have a lot of different identities. So a lot of the world faiths that are associated with possession are actually describing a real phenomenon, some demon possessing some human being. And this did happen even before Jesus, even before ostensibly before the time of the Old Testament. These are demons in the pagan world. Now, in terms of the efficacy of the major or minor rite exorcism, I'm very skeptical that it would have worked and I believe exactly what Jay said about the reality of the Trinity, even in the times of the Old Testament. We're of one mind on that. But I mean, it's a really interesting proposition. There's not efficacy to exorcism unless it's done in the power of Jesus. That's fundamental. It's Jesus. It's done under the person and the name of Christ. So while folks could have been possessed before, they couldn't have been exorcised without the power of Jesus. I think that was the specific call to the question, right?
That was an example, because I was thinking about this. Like, for example, Zoroastrianism, that is that originates to 6th or 7th century BCE. Is that that's older than Judaism, right? Right, guys?
Yeah, I mean, so Zoroastrianism, atheists will claim that it's a monotheism.
But the reason why I asked about just getting confirmation on how old it was is because I think it's older than Judaism, and I remember in my research for one of the shows that I did on any kind of ritual, spiritual rituals, rites, and exorcisms, things like that. That Zoroastrianism did have exorcism. They did drive out demons to restore spiritual balance. So you're saying that it could not have happened back then because they weren't saved, or were they just chasing out demons with demons? What do you think what could have been?
One of the common things in Roman Catholic exorcisms with energamon, people who've been possessed, is they'll experience significantly worse manifestations when they're trying to take deeper steps into the faith. And if they stop praying, praying the office or praying the rosary or receiving daily communion or something like that, the demons will actually leave them alone a lot more. And this is a tremendously powerful disincentivization for folks that are maybe superficial of faith before going deeper into the faith. The reason I say this is because I think Zoroastrianism is even older than that, but someone maybe get a date on it. But it is. I do believe the primordial form is older than Judaism without looking. I don't buy that it's a veritable form of monotheism. So that's a sort of petty point. But I would say that if there were practitioners of Zoroaster or whatever who claimed that this person's demonically possessed and we can help him, that's a very difficult thing, even in veritable, Christian practitioners of exorcism, like, priests and bishops of the Catholic or Orthodox Church who do this with the real power of Jesus. It's not always clear. This is something I've been at a few minor rite exorcisms over the last few years. It's not clear whether or not the demon has been completely exorcised. So the claims that Zoroastrian might make to having an efficacious exorcism, while I'm fully willing to believe that they could have been possessed 3,000 years ago, the claims are more tenuous that they've had an efficacious full exorcism. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. Jay,
I'd like to make a point too.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
I'm not sure what. And I'm not trying to be contentious, but I'm not sure what you guys mean that Zoroastrianism is older than Judaism in this. Do you mean in the sense of like Judah or Mosaic law? I mean, Judaism is, I think, older than Zoroastrianism.
Oh, it is? I was just trying to...
Well, I mean, if you believe Genesis, I mean, true Judaism is present in the book of Genesis. Judah is, Jacob's son. So,
well, even if Zoroastrianism is younger, they aren't in any way or shape form align with each other, or they're two different sets of beliefs.
Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion, right? So it's like you have these two forces. I mean, maybe somebody would argue it's not. It's mono. I've always heard it was. I'm not an expert on it, but that it was dualism.
Okay. Well,
it is dualistic. I just the claims of atheists will always amount to that it's like 3,000 years plus old, and they always say that it's monotheistic, which it's really not.
Well, the only reason why I brought that up was just to have an example that was almost equally as old, but also outside of the Old Testament, New Testament. But
see, like what I was getting at earlier with this notion of assumptions about the ancient world. There's so much that we don't know. I mean, when the Magi come, a lot of the tradition is that, right, the Magi were influenced by Zoroastrianism. And so, in other words, it's entirely possible that Zoroastrianism was influenced by Jewish prophets rather than the other way around. But you see, like the assumption of unbelieving scholarship is always that the Old Testament, Christianity, these are all ripoffs of the other religions. They never assume even the possibility that the Hebrew prophets influenced Zoroaster or influenced Plato or anything like that. You see, it's always the other way around.
You know, wonderful point. That's a great point right there. Thank you for that.
Yeah, even though I'm just looking at it on Encyclopedia Britannica now, and what Jay just said is evidenced in a plenary way here. The Christians, following a Jewish tradition, identified Zoroaster with Ezekiel, Nimrod, Seth, Balaam, and Baruch, even through the latter with Jesus Christ himself. On the other hand, is the presumed founder of astrology and magic. Zarathustra could be considered the arch heretic. The ancient Greeks saw in Zoroastrianism the archetype of the dualistic view of the world and human destiny. Zarathustra was supposed to have instructed Pythagoras in Babylon and to have inspired Chaldean doctrines in astrology and magic. It is likely that Zoroastrianism, and this is this is as secular as the scholarship gets, that it influenced the development of Judaism and the birth of Christianity. The funny thing here is this cope that the atheists and secularists will always make, this move so that Zoroastrianism is like the original and fourth monotheism. They say it contains both monotheistic and dualistic features. That's not true. If you study it even a little, it's purely dualism. It likely influenced the other major Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And the coping element is in the way that they're defining monotheism. It's fully polytheistic.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing too, you'll notice, like we met earlier on, we were talking about the essay about Mithraism. A lot of atheists will actually repeat quote scholarship that's like 200 years old. So like this story that Christianity is a development out of Zoroastrianism, because Zoroastrianism taught spiritual evil. Judaism got that from Zoroastrianism. That's all like scholarship that was in vogue like in 1900. And what's funny about scholarship is that today's scholarship discards most of that. Like it's a never ending, like it's always changing. So for example, they used to say, oh, there was this mythical Q. Q was what influenced Mark to write the Gospel of Mark and all this stuff. That was in vogue for decades amongst academics to debunk the Bible and the New Testament. And what's weird is that if you look at scholarship today, like they don't even believe in Q. This has been discarded. So it's a never ending sort of all over the place thing with modern scholarship. And a lot of atheists, they're just sort of like repeating what was in vogue 100, 200 years ago.
Very, you guys, I can't thank you enough. Tim, is there anything you'd like to say close to Jay's final comment over there? Because I'm going to wrap it up then, if not, and I can't wait to have you both back on. This has to like become like volume 1 of many, because I'm a novice still, and I got a lot of questions, and the audience generates a lot of questions too. That I feel that we really we took the task tonight in an interesting way. You got anything, Tim?
Well, I just apologize for my weak hotel internet connection. I was trying to say at one point something that's perfectly concomitant with the point Jay had just made about the cult of Mithra. There's a great quick video that you can find on YouTube, Archbishop Fulton Sheen debunking it to a very similar tune is what Jay was saying. The idea that Christianity is simply derivative of the cult of Mithra on YouTube. It's just Christianity and Other Religions is, I believe, what it's called. It's from Fulton Sheen's show that he used to have in the late 50s. It's really, really, really excellent. If you just type in Fulton Sheen, Other Christianity and Other Religions. I would just say, yeah, we should talk about this is a question of scale and scope. When we're talking atheist or agnostic, secularist caricatures of Christianity, I'm always gonna, sound pretty much exactly like Jay. But we should do shows here because we're all friends on your show, Frank. Differences between these two ancient, truly ancient forms of Christianity, Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Because a lot of people out there are like, well, in America are Protestant. well, Protestantism is a 500-year-old religion. It's different when when you have a Catholic and an Orthodox talking together. Both of our faith goes back all the way to Jesus 2,000 years ago. But there are real differences. They just don't tend to come up unless you get into the nitty gritty. But we should do that here on your show.
I'd love to. That sounds like a really great time to me. Jay, anything you want to say in closing? If not, I really can't thank you guys enough for your time.
No, it was great. Appreciate it. Great chat. Great insights from Tim. I mean, I'm always down to have a, charitable fun back and forth of, where we agree, where we disagree as well.
Okay. Well, I just double checked all the super chats. I wanted to make sure that there weren't any burning questions coming in from the audience. I don't see anything that was really directed at you guys. Just a lot of wonderful, glowing reviews of the conversation, and I look forward to volume 2. I hope you both have a great night. TimothyJGordon.com, Jay'sAnalysis.com. Those URLs are in the description of the episode. Thank you, boys.
Thank you, man. Later.
All right. Take care. There you go. 8:25 p.m. All right. What do you think about that? When we come back, we have a little bit of time for each other. And I'm going to open up the lines and see what you all think, and maybe we'll assess how much free time we have after that, and we can just talk about anything, including that ridiculous Russia thing. So as long as everybody's opinions have been put onto the table, and we'll see where the calls take us. And if the well runs dry on that, then I know to change topics. All right, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
It's intermission time, folks. Time out to press the like button. Thank you.
Guys, that's what they're trading.
Trade what?
All those videos.
We have to do something, and we have to do it now.
I'm gay.
Who's that?
I'm gay. Very gay. I'm gay. I'm gay.
Quite frankly.
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 Quite frankly, guys.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
So everybody watch, Quite Frankly, with Frank.
Quite frankly.
How dare you?
All right. Okay, so the number you can call in, I want to hear what you guys think. Thoughts, opinions, whatever you would add, subtract, whatever. Something you say might become a question or a topic for another show. Hell, the entire reason for tonight was generated from an internal email that I got from an audience member. So there's that. 914-200-0269. Just give me a buzz. That would be great. Okay, over on Quite Frankly, superchat.com, I've got something from Jay Britt. Says, I was excited about this show, and I was not disappointed. Thank you, Frank. Well, thank you, Jay. And then Benny Farina says, what a show. I was excited for this one. Thanks, Frank. Another great newsletter as well. Yes, no, it was. What a great newsletter. Let's take a call from Rick Carmen. What's going on, Rick?
Frank, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing okay. How's everything out there in Long Island?
Oh, good. And I have a lot to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I am, I would say extremely religious. I am spiritual. I'm a Christian. I was raised Catholic just like you. And I have come to learn a greater understanding of the Bible. So, the first thing I'd like to say is we've been misled in our society to believe that people are good. And that's a misnomer. People are evil by nature.
Evil by nature.
The thing is evil by nature. And I hate to say that because I always look for the good in people, but we are all evil by nature, and it's something we need to accept. Okay? But when it comes to the Trinity,
yeah, but wait, Rick, but before we move on to the next, is there any room for possibility that people are just products of their childhood? That people are obviously.
That's what they're trying to teach us. But the thing is, if you look at the Bible and you look at the history of the Bible, we're evil by nature. We're God is trying to draw us in to be good, to be, and we have our moments. There's certainly times in life when we are good, and I certainly celebrate them as much as you do.
I think we're more gullible. I think we're more gullible. I think we're more gullible. I think we're more easily influenced than we should. But we have our temptations, and that there are motivations. I think we're just dragged around by our addictions and carnal desires.
I believe that interpretation to you, but I think if you analyze your life and you'll realize there are times when you do things that are not really good. Okay, so that's an individual choice, but I think if you do a thorough analysis, you realize that we are evil by nature. We strive to be good, but we don't achieve that. But the thing is, our base is that we're evil. Okay. Now, being that you're a parent, I'm going to explain to you the Holy Trinity, and you will understand this being a parent. Okay, God created us and set us in the Garden of Eden, and there was only one rule, and we broke it. Okay, and I'm sure that happened with you with your daughter, correct?
What?
Sooner or later.
Oh.
Huh?
No, nothing. Go ahead.
But eventually, God came to us as a human to basically address those situations, because what happened was, God, we were allowed to go about ourselves, and there were people who took control of things and basically determine what God meant by those rules, okay? Because you have, in the early Testament, you have the Ten Commandments that came through Moses. But before Christ came, there were already 613 rules.
Hey, Rick,
Yeah.
Rick, if we're inherently evil, why would there need to be any level of deception to bring us to evil places?
You understand the concept of original sin, right?
Yeah. Oh, and listen, we got listen. Just whatever you.
And
I just want you. I want you to get to the profound conclusion of your thoughts, so we can get other calls in and stuff. Because I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, I'm just saying. Original sin basically said that God said, "Here's this garden, enjoy yourself, but don't do this."
Mm-hmm.
We broke that rule. Okay. Now, we are inherently evil, mainly because we tend to not follow God's direction, but to choose our own path, okay? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're terribly bad, okay? We're
what?
just inherently evil.
Wait a second. Hold on. The definition of evil is like profoundly wicked. We're talking about immoral. So how can
by whose definition?
What's your definition? What's your definition of evil? Because what I see as imperfect and susceptible to temptation is not a scheming, wicked, immoral person. By even original sin, that was a product of temptation. It wasn't that.
So where do you find your definition of evil?
I that's just the English language.
It's a societal thing, right?
Oh, okay. Yes, I guess so.
Okay, yeah. I'm asking you to analyze the words that you're using. Okay, evil doesn't necessarily mean that we're out there diabolical and going out to destroy everybody. It means that we're going against God's word.
Well, thank you. Well, let's see what other people have to say about that, Rick.
I want to bring that on. But going back to the Trinity.
Please,
okay?
please, okay, 30 more seconds. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, going back to the Trinity.
Quick.
As a father, you basically have a child, you give them some rules, they break those rules. You basically involve yourself in the human nature to reinforce those rules and ask them to do something better, which is what Christ done. And then when you're gone, you hope that those rules and messages come to them in the Holy Spirit. In other words, that is the definition of the Holy Trinity.
Okay, well,
That's something, because Christ told us, he taught us things in parables because we could not understand. I mean, we couldn't understand. If we couldn't understand it here on earth, how could he tell us heavenly things?
Okay, well, again, let's see what people have to say out there, Rick. I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of contradiction just in what you said. As far as, how evil, how do you define evil? The way that Rick was talking about there, evil sounds like it's just like I got out of bed and bumped my head today. I must be evil. There's one thing to be imperfect, to be susceptible to temptation, but I mean, evil is diabolical. Seahawk, hello, how are you?
Hey, pretty good.
Doing well. How you? Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't ask me. How are you? What's on your mind tonight?
I was just listening to the recent live stream, and that Rick guy's boomer explaining of original sin just made me laugh. Am I on the air now, or? Yes,
you are.
Oh, okay. Well, I just think the whole concept of original sin is just ridiculous. It's a method to shame people. It's like a reflexive nature of, I guess, baby boomers and evangelicals to say that we're bad people, even though you're a believer. So I totally disagree with original sin.
I don't know what I believe. Listen, I know it's there. I've heard about it since the time I was a kid, so I know what it's all about. But that's just one of those things again that the jury's still out with me for a lot of things that just logically don't. I haven't reached a conclusion yet. And you say, well, it's not your. Some people would say, frankly, it's not your conclusion to be reached. It is just what it is, and that's what I told Jay before, even with the Trinity. Explain this to me like I am a child, because when my kid starts asking me, I am, that's just the way things are, is not an answer I would ever accept if I was a kid. I'd want to know a little bit more. So I always. Maybe it's my own fault, or I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, but I always saw things like that as highly symbolic. And maybe
but the problem with people like that, it's like they take that wholeheartedly, like they're originally a bad person, and then they go out in the world and they're, oh, I'm a shameful person, I'm not a good person, and then they just. That's their programming and their outlook on life is like, oh, I'm a bad person. People are bad.
Well, here's what I'll give to you, Seahawk. And is that the last thing you wanted to say? Because I have some things now in mind. I just want to throw out there.
Yeah, go for it, dude.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the call. Secondly, it even goes outside of the bounds of Christianity for me. For example, all right, we were talking with a few guests, and we often talk about things like manifestation, law of attraction. What I saw in 2006 or whatever the hell it was, we had James Arthur Ray on the show not too long ago. A few weeks ago, he was on the show. And James Arthur Ray was featured in that documentary movie that which I still believe is like the first movie to go viral by way of social media, The Secret. And when you start learning about vibration, just the energetic makeup of the universe, atomic, molecular levels, energy, and I still apply all of that even in my spiritual life now. That kind of confidence in God and His power and all of that. It's usually what charges my prayers and my intentions, and I never. That's why none of my prayers are ever about asking for anything. It's always about empowering and finding strength, confidence, and guidance, and going out there and being the best I can, or trying to achieve victory in one thing or another, or solving a problem. Because to be able to manifest something, you need to be able to beam that energy. But whether you're coming from a religious standpoint or just a very strictly new age kind of a standpoint, like The Secret or something like that, you have to keep one thing in mind, and that is you own your failures as well as your triumphs. And when you start hearing and first start conceptualizing the fact that the problems that you have are probably linked directly, most definitely linked directly to the way that you live your life, the way that you think, certain patterns that need to be broken, all that other shit. It's almost like learning about original sin. It's like, what's your original sin? And can you even find it? That's why I always thought it was very symbolic. Because you want to talk about the first two people on earth and the snake. And, there's got to be, I mean, Jesus taught in parables. Why wouldn't that be in some way a parable? I don't know. It's just the way that I always interpreted it. But when you start learning about that from that standpoint, that you're owning both your failures and your successes, and it's all about how you're putting forth your intentions and acting on those intentions, then it can become a little bit depressing, because the first thing you start noticing is just how negative you think, and how a lot of our inner monologues, for those of us who have inner monologue, is actually very self-defeating and self-critical a lot of the time. And you have to be able to break that. I still got a big problem with that myself, but I catch it a lot easier now. It's a lot less, daunting a task, because you do start walking around. You're like, oh man, I'm never going to be able to get on top of this. I'm just programmed for self-destruction. That's essentially like learning about original sin. Like I never had a chance. I was born with original sin. It's just one of those things, man. It's one of those things. I see the parallels with a lot of it. Over on let me see here. Over on quitefrankly.tv, there are no Rumble rants. So let's go to quitefrankly.tv. Esther G says, I'm really looking forward to Adel in the studio tomorrow. It's going to be great. Damn right it is. Doug Simi, thank you. C. Blanche, Robert Sarnes, Sean Joe, Empress Bitch to You says, good evening, Franklies. Good evening. Sean Joe, Ginger 45, Braves Piano. They're throwing these cookies around like it's nothing. Winston Dave says, very interesting discussion tonight, both the guests and the chat. C. Blanche again, great show. No Stud All Muffin threw a cookie my way, and Witchy Poo comes in and says, happy birthday month for Aurora. Yeah, her birthday's next Saturday. Her birthday is next Saturday, the 14th. And I don't know what we may be on the road all day. I don't know. May have to go up to see her cousin play football in New England. That'd be nice. But it's like a 3.5 hour trip both ways. And I was talking with Lauren about that today. It's like, that she's 3, she doesn't really get it. And we'll all get together that next day, the Sunday. But would you want to spend your third birthday, your fourth birthday in a car the entire day? Maybe she's just going to have to get it. If you're going to spend it in a car the entire day, you might as well be 4 with your parents, because that's when you actually want to hang out with your parents, when you're 4. If she was 14, she'd probably want to slash the car's tires so we never leave the house. So I'm just enjoying this as much as she is. Thank you, Witchy. Thank you, Sean Joe. C. Blanche again says, thanks, Frank. Yes. Thumbs up for volume 2, says C. Blanche. All the best to you guys. Delona, Doug Simi, and Sean Joe. All right, 914-200-0269. 914-200-0269. And anybody want to say anything else? Well, it's 8:45, so I'm not gonna jump into the Russia stuff. I'll just keep that tomorrow when we have a full complement of guests over here. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of fun. What is this? Inside the... Oh, he's done it again. Nick Shirley. Hold on. I just got tagged on Twitter. I got to get in touch with this kid. I talk to him a lot behind the scenes, and I always wish him luck. He's got balls of steel. He went in the inside of the apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado, where the Venezuelan gang is in charge. I'm going to play that in just a second. Let me take a couple of calls. 757, you're on the air. What's going on, Doc Keck?
Living the life, living the dream, Frank.
Tonight could not have been. There's no way in hell this night could have ended without a call from Doc Keck on this subject matter.
Nah, man. It's pretty awesome. And hats off to Jay and Timothy. They really did cover a lot of things. Hypostases being one of them. It's kind of like the three persons, the three personalities of God. That many people see Christ as being God. Well, the Holy Spirit is just as equally as God as Jesus is. And to kind of touch on original sin and kind of, I forgot what his name, but the idea of we're evil by nature, and really that comes by our tendency to elevate our own mind over the Spirit, or to try and equate our own mind to that of Spirit. Because really, if you think about the natural order of things, it's not our spirit, but that of the Father that we must acquiesce, so that the mind may rightly rule the flesh. Like original sin, and why God said, if you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die. But then, Adam and Eve continued to live on hundreds of years after, is because many people think that death is meant in a mortal sense, like, oh yeah, you're going to cease to be. No, death and sin are separation from God. It's the separation of the Spirit. It's the elevation of their own minds in the sense of their own knowledge to judge good and evil as they see fit, separate from the Spirit that is death. Right?
Oh, and it feels like death, because I can tell you when you get on a when you feel like you've been pulled off track and your mind is in places that are not productive, whether you're comparing yourself again or you're just dealing with one thing or another, and you're not staying focused, and you're missing church or whatever the hell it is. It almost feels like you are sometimes being sucked down into a whirlpool. And then all of a sudden you get back on track, and it's almost as if you've plugged the charger back into the wall. It does feel that way.
Yep. And there's a reason for that, because when you're tied into the source of all being, it tends to right everything. And one of the greatest assets that we have as a result of faith is shalom, which is peace. And it's like people can strive for their own desires, for their own for the things that they want, and they're doing all of these things, all of these actions. They're jumping through all of these hoops, when really in the end, the result of that is really a desire for peace.
What would you say?
Peace of mind, peace of spirit.
So then, getting away from peace, real quick. Give me your thoughts on evil. Are we inherently evil?
Well, I think that we're inherently evil based upon our ability to focus and concentrate on ourselves.
Yeah, and you
anything which
that's considered, and you consider that an evil, because I feel like it's just that when Rick says that, I feel like it's a bridge too far. I don't see us as perfect beings, and I think that bad habits can become worse and worse and worse. But inherently evil doesn't sound very nice.
We within our own being are inherently separate from the Father. Our own responsibility is to believe in Christ. And when that happens, when we have the mind of Christ, then we're able to serve the Spirit, so that the Father may be glorified within us, and that His Spirit can rightfully lead our mind as it is that He pre-eternally ordained us to be. Like I would recommend John 17 for anyone listening to this podcast today, and for you specifically, because it is what Christ prayed for prior to moving into the crucifixion. And really what he is asking for is that we be his brothers and sisters in the spirit. Like, that's why he died for us, right? And that is really the differentiating factor between Christianity and every other religion. It's that the God that we worship died for us so that the spirit that he served can indwell within us. And it's like the Christ in you, the hope of glory. And that's what he prays all throughout John 17, so that we can be returned back to the original intent of the Father before the foundation of the world.
Okay,
before creation either ever came into being.
So let me ask you one more question. This is a question I'll probably ask again of future guests, but I always wondered why flesh. You know, when you think about being the creator of all things, why flesh? Why the necessity to be physically born of woman, to be born to low status, to grow up, to be physically tortured and brutally murdered? Why was that necessary to be able to complete the mission? Was there any other way that could have happened? I always wondered why the flesh and blood ritual.
Well, because it was the flesh that needed to be redeemed to the spirit by the mind of Christ.
And that's the only way. That's the only way to do it. That was the only way that could have been done.
Jesus asked if there was any other way. There was no other way. By the Father, there was no other way. Scripture.
It's one of those things that always very confounding to me. It really is. I understand this. I understand I understand why people believe it's symbolism. It's dramatic. It's all the other stuff. But it's also, there's something else to it. And
well, there is, and actually there are some that will say that by the redemption, what we are provided is actually opportunity to a higher order of being than even Adam and Eve, because the Spirit dwelt among them. The glory of the Father was among them, but it was not indwelling within them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Christ's sacrifice provided, so that we could have the indwelling Spirit within us. And once that happens, church age is over. Then we move into kingdom.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Doc. It's great to have you on. I'm glad you were able to squeak a call in toward the end.
Definitely. Many blessings. Thank you, Frank.
Take care, my friend. All right, one last call, 817. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, Frank. This is Mitch. I just wanted to briefly touch upon some of the stuff that's been said about original sin.
Okay.
So this is actually from some of the earliest doctors of the church. Well, to be more exact, this is a moral theologian and famous scholastic theologian, Thomas Aquinas. Now, of course, he's going to have more of a Western understanding developed by Aristotle, but a lot of this was actually introduced back after the death and resurrection of Christ around the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, so the earliest church fathers. He's just basically taking a lot of Aristotle, Greek philosophy, as well as some of these church fathers like Ignatius and Augustine. Essentially, he believed that we inherited a propensity to sin from our first parents, Adam and Eve. While our nature is not wholly corrupted by sin, it's nevertheless diminished by sin's stain. All that means is that while we have concupiscence to the material or towards the lustful passions, and we're not just talking about like sexual immorality, but things such as gluttony or greed or wrath upon your neighbor and brother, we are not evil by nature. So, in fact, the church has actually condemned that as a heresy to say that human nature itself is evil, because then the logical conclusion is to rid mankind, right? So you could actually make an argument for a death cult or a death culture, because since humanity by nature is evil, why should we exist? Right. And this is sort of the point that a lot of Catholics and Eastern Orthodox argue is that while we have a propensity towards concupiscence, we are not by nature evil. That's why it's more virtuous to turn away from things that are naturally more material. Now, material things in themselves are not bad. We need money to live. However, the excessive indulgence in money, the love of money, which replaces our love for the supernatural or for God, that's when it starts to become corrupted. So you're starting to see a little bit more in the shift. So we have to understand evil from a deprivation of what is good. And what is good, objectively, from a Christian moral standpoint, it is God, the central focus of everything. So our lives are supposed to be holy, not because we are, evil by nature. So therefore, we have to essentially become a Gnostic, where both the flesh and the spirit are corrupted, and we have to transcend ourselves into another life. Rather, we turn away from the things that have been corrupted in large part. And another thing, too, is just, to kind of put a little neat bow on it, is that we do not inherit original guilt, right? So even though our first parents, Adam and Eve, sinned, we don't inherit their guilt, right? So it's not a sins of the father which we have to make up for. And, it's an angry God who tries to demand all these impossible challenges for us, but rather he actually has come back in the form of the God-man, Jesus. And so that's just a little bit of summation I wanted to put on it. I know you're going to have more guests on, like Tim Gordon and Jay, probably, to discuss this more in depth, but I just thought I'd give you a little snippet of what's probably to come.
No, I like, and I'm always looking for new guests, by the way, there too. I mean, I've just become friends with so many great people. I love having return guests, especially when we are able to do group calls like we did tonight. But that was a very, very fine contribution, much more than I could have done myself. And I'm glad that it became the last call of the night. So again, Mitch, thank you for the call.
Yeah, of course. You have a good one, Frank.
You too. Have a great one. And that's the end of Thursday night. Now, I know I'll be getting some phone calls, or I'll be getting some maybe phone calls tomorrow night, but there's also the email, quite frankly, super chat, quite frankly, podcast at gmail.com. Leave after post-show comments. Get in that comment section, especially on YouTube. We have had that entire account be asleep for over a week. We need to wake it up algorithmically, so please leave likes and shares and go back and leave a comment, especially if you're listening to this after the fact. Leave a comment right now as you're listening. There's one super chat, Rumble rant that came in on Rumble. Hey, would you blow me too? Says, we'll all know the truth shortly after death. That is always a guarantee, isn't it? Okay. All right, well, I had a great time here tonight, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow for another fantastic week finale. There we have Matt will be to my left, and across the way will be Adel, and we'll spend 2 hours with you guys talking about the news, cracking jokes, and maybe even puffing on a hookah. It's been a long time since we did that, and I'll look forward to it. Okay, with that being said, good night. I got to do some audio testing over here with Mike, so better get off right now. Nighty night.
I'll catch you on the flip side.
Quite Frankly is filmed for a live studio audience, and now our super chatters, starting with Jay Britz and ending with Benny Farina. Thank you so much to Hey, Would You Blow Me Too over there on the Rumble Rants, and to all of our wonderful friends with the gold pills. I am releasing the scratching as we speak. And you know what? To hell with it. We're going to dump over the treasure chest over there on D Live as well. So look out for that, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Go and become a sponsor, quitefrankly.tv, at the sponsor us section, because as you know from this week, independent media is in the crosshairs, and it will continue to be so. So make sure you put your weight behind it. It doesn't take much, and it goes a long way. Good night.
But you are asking me to give you the key to his room so you can walk in, put a gun to his head and pull the trigger, and I can't do that.
He murdered Annie and Peter.
There are only murderers in this room. Michael, open your eyes. This is the life we chose, the life we lead. And there is only one guarantee. None of us will see heaven.